Thank you, Ali. So I'll take you for about 20 minutes through the seven sources of customer value. I'm going to start a little bit with a small history lesson, though, just in terms of how did we get here, and then I'll bring you right up to where the quantification has taken place. So, a bit of the origins and inspiration. Some of you may know who Peter Drucker is. I didn't when I first joined Quadrangle, to be brutally honest, in 2003. I was very quickly introduced to his thinking. I guess the sort of preeminent management consultant of the 20th century. And this sort of quote was drummed into me very early on in terms of trying to help clients see what it is that they're offering from the customer's point of view, rather than focusing in too much on their own silos and their own organizational structure. And along with that, I was introduced to a model that Quadrangle still uses today and is incredibly simple, but it's really about trying to make sure there's clear alignment from your organization, from your brand, between what you are, so your brand, your personality, what you want to be in the marketplace, what you say, your communications, public statements, that kind of thing, and what you do, so your offer, and also how you act, and making sure that that is really clearly thought through and presented to the customer in a way that they can understand, see consistency through, and not have their confidence undermined by, is absolutely critical. Very easy to say, very simple model, still incredibly difficult for many organizations to achieve this. And I was just talking to a client on Friday, and actually one of the things I hadn't considered, I was thinking about the difference between marketing team, product team, management teams, etc. And she was talking about, well, wait till you start thinking about different P&Ls and trying to get any kind of cross-fertilization and thinking across those. It's really almost impossible to put something unified and cohesive out to our client, our customers. Now, some of you on the webinar will know this gentleman who unfortunately passed away in 2021. But one of the things that was absolutely critical to him, and I woke up this morning in a sweat because I forgot to put the word because in the statement, an incredibly precise man, John, who was the founder of Quadrangle, along with his wife, Christine. A real belief that actually, and again, wanting to really drum this into all the work we do for clients, that customers create the value in brands, and it's really, really critical to focus on what matters to customers. And so a lot of what he would talk about in meetings I'd go to would be V2C drives V2B, his shortcut for value to customer drives value to the brand. And a really strong bond. The more you increase that perceived value that customers have of what your brand has to offer, the more a brand can benefit from customer spend, customer attention, loyalty, whatever else you might want to call it. The odd client will question this and say, prove it, as opposed to kind of accepting it as gospel. But I guess the bigger question we were asked is, okay, great, but what would you put in those two buckets? And it was pretty easy to do the right-hand one to some degree, because what we were thinking about is really, you've got to focus on what the customer performance metrics are, not just a bunch of all the other metrics that a business might want to look at. These are the ones you're really trying to drive. If you go back to that belief that customers create the value in brands, then you're trying to bring in more customers that spend with you more, that kind of can cost you efficiently, not just to acquire, but then to serve. And then you can look at whether you're gaining them, how you're losing them, and how you're retaining them. That bit was easy. The question we were also asked was, well, what does customer perceived value actually mean? So that was the question we wanted to set about. Loads of work with John in the 2010s to try and sort of work this one through. Lots of projects we were working on, including projects for the likes of Royal Mail, where we were really trying to understand actually how was that organization able to support the sales and promotion of its business mail to organizations wanting to communicate with customers, and then really trying to understand that in customer terms. So what is the value that they can get from that, so that it could promote itself alongside email communications and other communications at the time. But there were loads of projects we were doing, much more on the sort of qualitative side to try and understand this. So the sort of questions we might ask, but also from a kind of analysis perspective. So yeah, big question, what should we put in this bucket? So I'm going to take you through what the model's about very quickly. First of all, a quote from Joe Pulizzi, who's obviously slightly more modern than Drucker, but talking about some very similar things, and very focused on sort of content marketing and the whole way that marketing works these days. Good provocation, customers don't care about you, they care about themselves. I don't 100% believe in that, because I think there's loads of customers out there that do care about the organization. But actually the point he's really trying to make here is you've really got to ruthlessly and relentlessly focus on what matters to customers again. So just another proof point in our sort of thinking that we really needed to make this model very focused on customers and what matters to them. But of course, beg, steal and borrow from existing wisdoms, and those were that you have to have good hygienes and you need to have good motivators. And actually, sometimes if you're focused too much on the motivators ahead of the hygienes, you can have quite a dysfunctional brand. I'm a driver of many Alfa Romeos in my time, and I can tell you that there is quite a lot of dysfunctionality around being very passionate about an Alfa Romeo because they don't always deliver on the hygienes. So what we started to look at was 3 areas in the hygienes. Jobs to be done kind of territory. Can it do what the customer requires of it? Is it good quality? And that's often an objective or subjective view. And then can they rate that from a kind of value for money perspective? And really what these are good at, and we saw this through loads of qualitative research we did in analysis, is that they're great at driving that kind of initial preference. They're good at creating kind of passive habit, if you like. Sometimes people might see that as loyalty and feel that actually we've achieved the loyalty we want to achieve, but it's very fragile. It's very easy for competitors to often copy the hygienes, deliver just as well, bring something of interesting quality in the market, and then challenge what value for money is all about. And so many clients we work with, Ali mentioned premium brands, but all sorts of clients we work with that are typically more established traditional brands that have been around for a while. Justifying premium and justifying their cost is becoming increasingly difficult in today's world where there's so much additional choice out there and loads of quality available to people that actually, again, the sort of fragility of this sort of end of the customer value pyramid, if you like, around hygienes is very easy to copy and to break down that preference that people might have for a particular brand. But obviously we need to move more into that kind of emotional territory. And a really important provocation is that I think all too often the emotional space is left down to things like experience and how well your brand's performing. But absolutely critical that you also look at how are you engaging with customers as well. And this quote from Tiffany Bova, sort of ex-Gartner and Salesforce now at Futurum, it just really encapsulates that brilliantly. So in looking at the sort of bottom half of the left-hand side of the framework, if you like, understanding, how well you're delivering the experience, sure, but critically in customer kind of sentiment terms, so how they're made to feel, not just literally are you achieving the quality kind of standards that you're looking to achieve. Actually, how's the customer feeling about that? Is this the sort of, brand that feels like it's for me? Good old classic statement, brand for someone like me. And then how well is the brand actually actively involving and listening to customers and engaging with them on customer terms? So those 6 elements so far, the 7 sources, fairly classic, things that you might expect to see. But the more we did our analysis, the more we worked with the model, the more we kind of stress tested it, the more it felt absolutely right to have all of those in. And really critical to these motivating end of the spectrum is that actually these are the areas that can really drive what we call the intentional loyalty, but you can call it enduring relationships if you want. This isn't about every single penny and pound that you can get from a customer, but it's about making sure that you're creating that kind of, that's the go-to brand for me in this space. And that's more defensible. It's, you're able to actually stave off the competition because of the way you're distinctive in this area and the way that you've built that engagement with customers. So, if the customer's having a consistently positive interaction, and that's not just for the customer, but from their perspective when they're trying to do things, that there's that sort of stronger association and commitment that can be formed through brand fit. So, how well the sort of values and the behavior of the brand fits in with the way they see themselves, and how much more you can build beyond the transactional in terms of engagement, being, again, absolutely critical to driving that. And then ease kind of sits in the middle. And of course, ease is really about that sort of perceived absence of effort. And what ease can do is it can enable customers across the model. So, if there's a lack of friction, it can help them move along the journey and become that go-to brand. But obviously, if a lot of effort is introduced or is there for the customer, it can also halt their progress across the journey. It can reverse it, and it can certainly send them off to alternatives to look at. So that's the model. I think sort of increasingly thinking about the work we do and why we think about customers in this way and why we come at customer understanding is our offer covers so much that integrates all of that thinking already. So whether we're thinking about driving, distinctive positioning for brands, and we've done a lot of work in distinctive assets recently, helping them build their propositions so they're compelling in the market, thinking about the strategy that they need for their customer experience, the platforms they require for how they want to communicate and think about their creativity and personality in today's world. And all of that work always inspired and underpinned by strategic insight. It fits for us that we have to be focused on all these things when we're thinking about how we're driving up value for customers on behalf of our clients. So Ali mentioned we've quantified this for the first time. We had just shy of 10,500 brand relationships that we assessed across 9 different categories. I'll show you some of that data shortly. And what was critical is we asked 35 statements across all of those brand relationships and then broke that down to 21 leading ones that fit across the 7 sources. So you've got 3 kind of key factors through factor analysis that fit each of the 7 sources. And at an overall level, and it's interesting to look at it at an overall level, but what becomes critical is when you start to look at it at a category and brand level, it's just interesting to see the shape, if you like, of those 7 sources. So actually, you've got quite an equal distribution between the more functional on the left-hand side and the more kind of emotional and motivating on the right-hand side. And again, just to plead to brands and clients to really think that you do need to cover the waterfront when it comes to trying to drive up that customer perceived value, creating those enduring relationships. There's just as much heavy lifting to do on the right-hand side when we just look at it at an overall level. So you've kind of got 2/5 on the left, 2/5 on the right, and 1/5 in the middle, ease being that kind of pivot point, if you like, between whether customers move up or leave sometimes the brand to go to alternatives. And just to very quickly shine on the screen the 21 factors, I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, but as I said, for each of the different 7 sources, you've got 3 factors that contribute to that. In the shading are the leading ones. So trust came out as the top. And then behind that, you've got hassle-free, so ease being really important. And then things like provides great service over bottom left around experience. We've shoved value for money in the top right-hand corner there because it's quite low when you look at it from an overall level. But as we start to look at some of the categories in a minute, we'll see that value for money can be incredibly important in some categories, at the expense of some of the other ones on here that at an overall level look like they're, absolutely critical to get right all of the time. So that just gives you a sense as to what sits underneath the model, how it's made up, and how we've created this. But yeah, as I mentioned, the category differences are really where it starts to get incredibly interesting when we think about, where your brand sits in a marketplace, what might be defining the category expectations. And a quote from Ali Camps, who's obviously on the panel and our chairman, that category sets the expectations for brands. She said this the other day. I then tried to find on Google who may have originally said it. And actually, Google says that nobody really originally came up with it. It's just one of those marketing concepts that's been around for a long time. So it's now the Ali Camps quote. There it is. I was bullied into putting that on. So that was our overall picture when we think about what we've just looked at. And if you think about it as a 7-band graphic equalizer almost, that some of those in the sort of audio world and those who've got old school kit or very new kit that might have a digitally saved under the hood of their audio player, you can adjust these like a graphic equalizer. And as we go through the different categories, you'll just see how they move and create quite a different customer value shape from each other. So that's it at the overall level. If we just go first of all to grocery and food customers, and I know certainly in terms of the signups, we've got a few of those on the call today. You can see that this changes quite dramatically. And 56% is now over to the left-hand side in terms of the sort of more functional dynamics versus 32% on the right-hand side. And ease has dropped down a little bit as well. But you can really see that value for money has shot up, but it's not the only game in town. And again, it's still really important to get those other elements right, particularly things like brand fit and thinking about, well, what's driving that value for money is probably some kind of assessment between the utility and quality elements of it as well. So, there's a lot of work done in the space to focus on value for money, but the other areas are really critical as well. If we then flick into clothing and fashion customers, you can also see that the shape has changed again. And in actual fact, it's a lot flatter overall as a shape. And you can see that quality comes through is really, really important. I mean, obviously, when it comes to clothing and fashion, people buy things from all sorts of different brands. So it can be quite difficult to hold on to what might be classically termed as loyalty, where there's almost a sense of we should be getting the vast majority, if not all of their spend. But actually, if you want to create enduring relationships in a sector, in a category that's got so much flux and change in it and so much choice, it's really critical, even though it's slightly smaller at 36% over there on the right-hand side for the more motivating aspects, to get that engagement right, to create a brand, create an image, create a connection with customers that they feel starts to really represent them, and the brands that they select that they're wearing day in, day out are actually representative of them. This is a Simon Carter shirt, in case anyone is desperately keen to understand, and that brand has very much done a good engagement job on me, where that's now where I buy all my shirts. as ridiculous as some of them are. Homeware and furniture customers, again, we've got some clients who are attending today who are in this sector. What's really interesting here is you can just see how big ease is in terms of what's driving people's choice here. And in actual fact, we're looking to try and get a new sofa at the moment. And even though, yes, we want it to look great and we want it to be great quality and the rest of it, there is something about making that journey simple and easy for us that is starting to kind of drive our choice. And particularly when we think about, can they take stuff away from us, not just deliver? Absolutely critical. And then current account customers. So I'm going to show you two back to back very quickly. So in the financial services space, it's really important not to just sort of think of it as an overarching category, and therefore let's understand our shape from that point of view. I'll show you savings in a second, but current account is very much driven by brand fit. It's not only why people hold on to their current accounts for so long, but there's so much inherent trust required, and trust is the key factor within brand fit here. That this is where people's money is held, this is where transactions take place, this is where lots of customer data, if you like, is kind of stored and held because of the amount of activity taking place when someone's got using their current account day in, day out, week in, week out. So it's really interesting to see that there. But then when we think about savings, that might be where the majority of people's money is kept. And it also is probably where people are looking for a high interest rate, right? Well, we know in the savings market that around 2/3 of people actually make a choice that's more about convenience, ease, something that feels right, as opposed to necessarily, is this absolutely the best rate I can get for my money and all the rest of it. And it's just really interesting to see the data reflecting that here as well, where value for money, sure, in financial services space is quite difficult for customers to get their heads around, but is very, very low. And again, ease is coming through as particularly strong here, perhaps less so on the brand fit compared to current accounts, but we can also see utility. Can they use it easily, et cetera, et cetera? Does it do what they want it to do? Being absolutely critical in the savings account space. And then just a couple more travel and holiday customers. Again, really interesting to see ease pop here. And yes, they're looking for some of those other experiential sides to come through, but ease, rides very much to the top here, and something that, companies in this space, brands in this space really do need to focus on. And then train travel customers, you can see it's a slightly different shape, again, to just that sort of more kind of holiday travel and general travel. The experience is important, but also making sure that it's a quality experience as well. And very often when you're talking to train travel customers, at the end of the day, you can try all sorts of things and all sorts of different ideas and try and create all kinds of engagement tactics. But at the end of the day, they want it to work well. And the experience of that is absolutely critical. And that kind of consistency of that experience is what they're looking for. Telecoms very quickly. Again, ease is really important. Value for money as well. And, certainly in this space, we've seen lots of different kind of pricing tactics take place over the last several years, around inflation and lots of sort of customer uproar when they're in contract, having their prices increase and that kind of thing. Really critical for customers in this space to feel that, they're not having friction put in their way, that they can see the service they're getting as value for money. And yes, there are some good engagement areas that can also be important. So that's the model. I just wanted to go through that pretty quickly just to show you that there are some really key differences by category. And, we do have some data on brands, but that's not for today. I guess a big question is, why are we talking about this now? Why do we feel this model's important? As if breaking down those silos and trying to represent things from a customer perspective rather than an organizational perspective wasn't important enough. I think if we think about the context in which customers sit today, what we also place around this model are three things that we feel are really important when we're working with each individual client to think about, okay, well, what's the context that your customers are in and your brand sits in? What has happened from a change point of view, whether that's about digital across the 10s, the pandemic in the early 20s, and now what we're seeing with the change coming from AI, understanding how that is impacting the value that customers are perceiving in the brands that they're engaging with, and also what that might mean for your customer performance metrics. And of course, customers are exposed to so many different organizations, brands, apps, tools, whatever else it might be. Their ability to compare is not typical and is not necessarily within category. They may well be comparing across category as well in terms of where they get that value from. So let's just focus on AI for a minute, because obviously that is the big, massive change that so many brands are experiencing, trying to grapple with and understand what their strategy should be. And a huge change that's happened for customers is they've moved from, and it sounds ridiculous to say basic search, because search has been pretty amazing when you think about, you can get millions of responses very, very quickly through Google. But you watch people using ChatGPT, and whether they're organizing their holiday or they're thinking about, which private medical insurance provider they might need for what they're looking for. And that kind of conversational discovery element that they gain from using something like ChatGPT just changes the game dramatically for what brands need to get right and how brands need to show up for customers, and also how they need to think about how do they make the AI tools work on their behalf. So what's really happened here is that search is sort of really based on reach and based on how many people may have said something to resonance, where one individual's comment, one individual's passionate view of their experience or of a brand creates a story, creates a narrative, creates something that AI can use to represent that discovery picture that it's trying to put forward to the customer. So there are 5 things that we feel customers really need to focus on, clients really need to focus on when thinking about this new terrain that they're in. First of all, we really have to shine wherever discovery happens. And of course, discovery is happening everywhere. So the idea that our sort of silos and our internal structure is something that isn't now enormously visible out there in the world, where, we might have positives and failures. And Sarah, who's on the panel, posted the other day about an experience she had with, I think, a fittings company for some new wardrobes. And there was a real lack of consistency in the experience and how that brand was coming across. The more people talk about things like that, that can be found now. There's really nowhere for brands to hide either their dirty laundry or indeed, their poor experiences. So all fails out there, got to be really, really protected against. Guiding your AI tools out there to represent the brand effectively. This is really about consistency, and just doing a test on some of sort of our clients and some of the best loved brands out there. Sometimes in things like ChatGPT, they don't show up much because they're so inconsistent with their messaging. They're so inconsistent with how they're coming across that actually ChatGPT doesn't really know what to make of that. And it's looking for consistency. It's looking at putting across solutions to customers that feel like they have that sort of sense of endurance and a sense of reliability to them. So really, really critical to think about, how do we want our brand to come across in this AI world? Being authentic and making sure that actions are properly guided by and reflective of brand intention. So being really clear what your brand's intention is, and then seeing that through everything that you do, everything that you say, and everything that you are is really important. And then number 4 there, personalize and ensure resonance and foster intentional loyalty by focusing on what truly matters to customers. That's what we've been talking about. Really getting that right, really focusing on customers, really understanding what it is that they value is going to be really, really important, and more important than it's been in the past. And then making sure that you're humanizing your brand is really critical. Again, it might seem odd, think about artificial intelligence and these tools and technology as not being particularly human things, but actually there's a real desire to humanize the brand and bring across that kind of, far more emotional and resonant angle that perhaps has been less important in the past. And actually, if you just ask ChatGPT or ask AI, what it thinks of all this, I'll read it out. AI-based search and discovery fundamentally shifts brand strategy from being driven by keywords to shaping the content that AI summarizes and recommends. This transition forces brands to build authority and credibility across a wider ecosystem of digital touchpoints, as they can no longer rely solely on a website to control their narrative. Yeah, pretty well put, actually, just in terms of the new battleground for brands and thinking about how do they come across to their customers. So this model feels more important than ever, making sure that there's deep connections across these, and that there's a holistic perspective put out there to customers and real integrity across the model. We strongly believe in our 7 sources of customer value model, the whole thing, not just, the 7 sources, but actually how it works as an overall system and what it can do for customers, and how it can really force an appraisal of and a perspective on, are we actually delivering value across the spectrum? And then in terms of how we feel it can be used, we think it's got great diagnostic power, because it's really able to look into those different areas to think about it from a category perspective and actually make it reflective of and bespoke to your brand as well. We're not an off-the-shelf agency. We're an agency that wants to work specifically on what the challenges our clients have and the audiences that they are trying to attract. So it can be very context specific, and it can obviously reflect what those expectations of a category are. I think it does help to force a reappraisal of actually what kind of value we're trying to drive in for customers, because it's agnostic of structure and silo. We think about things like NPS that are very much focused in the kind of, customer experience world, but also the ways in which it's incredibly reductive and tries to break everything down to one number. There's so much work that we have to do to then try and diagnose what's going on with it. Whereas I guess what we're trying to show here is we're trying to represent all the perceived value that a customer might have in a brand. And then what's great about it is it can be used to launch products. It can be used to understand how a product is doing in the marketplace, and also thinking about, well, what's next for a brand, a product, a service, whatever else it might be. So hopefully that's been relatively clear in terms of what the model's about, what it's starting to look like in terms of the data we've looked, and how it is different across category, and why in today's world we feel models like this are just incredibly important, based on the way the world is going. And that's me.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's so good to see that model finally come to life after having used it for so many years, but to actually see some data behind it. Data that I know there's a question in the chat already about how were the data collected. We did that via panel, a nationally representative sample of several numerous thousands, and as Ben said, several more thousand different brand experiences. So just pick that one up. I do find it really interesting to think about the nuance that we see across the categories, and the fact that it's the mix of the kind of the functional and the practical and the more emotional dynamics in this model that work differently in different categories to really bring the story to life and the implications for brands. And obviously there's a lot that we haven't been able to show here. And if we just take that example that you showed us of current account banking and savings and investments, and the difference there, and if you think, to be in a brand that operates across both of those categories, the challenges that you face in terms of actually speaking to all of those different drivers from the same provider. But that's what you've got to manage if you want to project yourself as an excellent brand. And so before we come to the questions on the chat, and I do encourage you to put your questions into the chat if you can. Let's just kick things off with a couple of questions that occurred to me as we were going through that. And Sarah, you've been around the block a bit, haven't you?
I have.
Metaphorically speaking.
I've been around lots of metaphorical blocks and lots of different sector blocks.
What kind of messages do you think brands should be taking away from this?
Okay. Well, firstly, let me congratulate you on an excellent piece of work, because it's very insightful. When I was reading through it, and I've worked in financial services, I've worked in retail, and for me, it really took me back to understanding what the depth of relationship is with a customer. So, for example, when I was the global brand director at Barclays for a while, and we clearly understood that the current account is the gateway product, and actually the decision-making process to get new customers or to get switches into a current account is entirely different to the depth of relationship you've got with, say, when I worked with the Irish retailers that we work with. So there's something about understanding how deep that relationship is. And part of that is the customer thinking, how quickly can I get out of this? So, if you're going to go and buy your ham for your sandwiches at lunchtime, there's not a lot of depth in that relationship. If you're thinking about where to place your current account, there's an enormous amount of depth in that relationship. So from a contextual point of view across the different sectors, it helps to think from a starting point of what is the context, as Rory says, what is the depth of that relationship, and what is the gateway into that relationship.
Give us an example of a brand that you have worked with or maybe worked for, where you really understanding what customers truly valued.
Yeah. Okay.
Made a difference.
Okay. So let's stay with financial services and Barclays.
Yeah.
So at the time when I was there was a huge battle for the current accounts. So we knew that current accounts were the gateway product. We knew the value, the lifetime value that a new customer would have across all of our different products if we got them in the current account. But we also knew that the competition was positioning themselves as friendly. So come to us, we're your friendly bank. Come to us, we'll be kind. We'll give you a piggy bank in the shape of a piggy bank. Come to us, we'll hold your hand. So we did a massive piece of research into understanding what customers valued in that gateway relationship. And what we found really clearly was that people wanted their bank to be safe and expert and trustworthy with their money. If I'm going to give you my salary every month, then you bloody well better keep that safe. I don't care how friendly you are, actually. What I care about is the safety of my hard-earned cash. So we did a huge repositioning exercise with Barclays to move away from friendly. I'm not saying we were going to be horrible, but move into a territory of expertise. And so we created an entire positioning around the money experts. And actually, if you look back to that time, you'll see the exponential growth in market share of current accounts because we moved away from where everybody else was playing in terms of, oh, they're friendly, they're kind, they're nice. People don't want that. They want expert, safe, trustworthy.
I guess also if you were Barclays going back to that time, projecting yourself as a friendly bank might not have had the authenticity that Ben talked about. I mean, is a brand that has had challenges in that space.
Right. So this was in the 2000s, and actually there is a whole segment of people who will still remember Barclays in South Africa, and that is this massive overhang that was years and years and years before. But actually, you're exactly right. That authenticity and that trust had to be overcome. Before.
On the flip side, they have, that expertise value is still very much there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Catherine, let's come to you. Because in the food category, you're expert in the food category, and we can see, you probably won't remember because there's a lot of data up on the screen, but customers lean towards a more functional view of what value means. But we can also see that quality and brand fit are key drivers of that perception of an excellent brand. So, in that space, the ever-present price wars, seem to be a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And certainly, questions as to who's the winner and who's the loser there, and where does the customer sit in that dynamic. But do you think grocery retailers are missing the point?
I think we might have become a little bit reductive in how we talk about value as an industry over the last few years, particularly in the cost of living crisis. And we've kind of lost the point that from a consumer perspective, when they talk about value, they talk about it in a much more rounded way. They're not just talking about what the price is. Obviously, price is really important, particularly in a cost of living crisis, and it's essential that we get the price right. But once customers then trust you on your price fairness, you've got permission then to play with your brand positioning and your brand fit and quality. And we see Tesco doing a great job of that now at the moment with their comms campaign, which is not just a little thing, it's everything. Which is really talking about a much more powerful brand message and a point of view and drawing people into store that way. And I think M&S do a great job at this as well with they're investing in their stores. Their in-store shopping experience is just a fantastic place to be. So we do see retailers talking much more beyond just value now, I think. But I think any retailer that is just focused on price as value is missing the point that price and value means a lot more to customers than just that shelf edge number.
Yeah, it's not just ham. It's not just ham. It's M&S ham. But we do know in grocery that the mission is increasingly important it's super important in terms of how brands are thinking about how they win in different spaces. And it makes me wonder whether actually the grocery category is more about, Ben's talked about intentional loyalty, and whether or not it's more about actually creating preference. What's more important? Is it preference or is it intentional loyalty?
Yeah.
That actually matters most.
Well, I don't think it's either or. I think it's a bit of both. So from a grocery perspective, convenience will always be the biggest driver of store choice. So where your shopper is and where your store is going to drive people in store. I think once we get them to start talking about specific missions and we talk about winning at more missions, if you're expecting people to come to you for a specific reason, for that dinner for tonight occasion, for example, you have to offer something, either unique product, unique quality, unique proposition that people just can't get elsewhere, or unique service, which that's funny as well. So yeah, I don't think it's either or. I think it's loyalty, but it's also preference, and the two of them are a little bit intertwined.
It's not either or, but and. I think one of my favourite mantras in life. You've done some work in grocery.
Yeah.
What's your take on this?
I think another thing that this work does is kind of blows apart or questions the whole purchase ladder, the funnel, and the kind of step-by-step nature of that, because humans don't work like that. I talk about the loop-de-loop of decision-making, where we all go in orbits, and we'll be orbiting around awareness and knowledge and consideration and preference, and we'll be coming back and visiting our decisions or our thought processes or our criteria constantly. And I think across the different sectors and the range of importance on the different seven sources, just reinforces that. You can't just think about awareness and, then I'm going to move my potential customers into the consideration set, because it's not like that. So for organizations, what I would think about is, how are you consistent at every single touch point, so that when your customers or potential customers are going through the loop-to-loop of decision making, you are meeting them where they are with what they need at every stage. You're not just trying to move them step by step.
And Ben, I'm going to come to you here, because I think one of the things that makes me think is that this model, what Sarah and Catherine just said, I think raises big questions for how brands approach measurement.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Listen, in so many organizations, the desire to have, the thrust to have one metric that, everyone can hang their hat on around where their customers are at. I get it. It makes life on the surface a lot simpler. Actually, it makes it a lot more complex, because the number moves around so much. Honestly, it's very difficult sometimes to actually understand what's driving that. I think there's a real, opportunity here to say, what are the customer metrics we should really be focusing on, and how can we use those to help us actually navigate this new terrain that brands are going to have to navigate. And just talking to a client again on Friday, didn't want to sort of they are so far behind in terms of even having a single view of their customers across the different products that they offer. There hasn't been, I think, enough onus on brands and organizations to really sort their internal structures out, really think about how do we build ourselves to drive customer value, rather than how we manage ourselves through management.
Well, it's a simple model on the one hand, isn't it? But it reveals a depth of complexity, I think, about the way that customers, the shortcuts that customers are adopting. I kind of think it's increasingly about understanding how much, that's saying, how much free rent space are you taking up in people's heads? It's that.
Are you the automatic choice?
Yes. And even if you're not it doesn't have to be every time, does it? Loyalty, I think we've had this kind of very one-dimensional view of loyalty.
Yeah. So your customer will buy all the other brands, but it's about making sure that you win when they want to buy you for that occasion. So it's that physical and that mental availability, making sure that you are top of mind salience, as well as being physically available.
Yeah. And I sometimes get asked, what does salience mean? I always define it as being a combination, that's the sweet spot of awareness meets relevance.
Yeah.
And relevance is, I think, is what this model helps us to understand better, because if you're not delivering on these 7 sources, then you are going to really struggle to be relevant to those individual customers. Then I know that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's also something about a different type of relationship you have with your customers. One of the best clients that I've ever worked with is Co-op Funeral Care. So we've worked with the retail side, but funeral care. And Co-op Funeral Care have 2 different propositions. They have what they call at need, when somebody sadly has died, but they also have the pre-planned.
Yeah.
And at understanding the difference in the decision, not what you're selling, not that price, but understanding the difference in what your customers are needing at that time will also impact the way that you build your relationship with people. And then the things within the 7 sources will flex as well. So it's understanding the totality of the customer relationship, I think, and then drilling down into the loop, and meeting them where they are. So it's a beautifully simplistic model which demonstrates, as you say, a huge amount of complexity in those relationships.
That's the best kind of one. We are running out of time. We've also had a bit of a slight tech fail in terms of the questions. So what I'm going to say is we will undertake to respond to the questions to everybody who's joined or signed up to the webinar, and we'll send out some combined responses to that. Last question, though, I know this did come through, goes to Ben in terms of what about B2B brands?
Yeah, well, it's been one of those things that's been around for a long time, hasn't it? And don't sort of treat businesses as just some kind of functional thing. There's an enormous amount of emotional connection, resonance built up in B2B relationships. And so, not focusing on those more motivational dynamics, it will be at your disadvantage. And we've used it with some of our B2B clients as well. Not from a quantitative perspective at this point, but certainly from a qualitative understanding.
Yeah. Just before we finish, let me just pick up a couple of these. Question from David around which brands do we feel are role models. I think we talked about some of those in grocery M&S. Barclays is a great example of owning a particular space around expertise to this day, digital expertise it is now, and various others. But there are other brands contained within the data that I think we may well be running another session on. We could look at that. Did we look at utilities? Yes, we did. Or insurance? No, we didn't look at insurance this time around. But I think the beauty of this is that, it's something that we will revisit over time. And
the insurance sector is interesting because in terms of the changing relationship, so the acquisition of a new customer versus the retention of that customer and the change in the different values, the sources of value.
Yeah.
So, the conversation about why are insurance customers getting a better deal when they come to me rather than when they stay.
It's classic, isn't it? Right. It's like how to put, you've got all of your investment into winning that customer.
Yeah.
And then undo it.
Yeah.
And then undo it at the end.
I thought having really interesting in the pandemic of giving £50 back to their customer. They knew that they couldn't possibly be using their insurance or needing their insurance as much as they were. And my latest car renewal came through, cheaper than last year. So I didn't even bother thinking it's time to move around. They'd already created that emotional connection with me.
Well, that's where ease comes in, right?
Yeah, and made it very easy.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you everybody for joining us. I think we could certainly carry on talking till we're blue in the face about this, but we welcome your feedback. As I said, there's much more than we've been able to show you today. So do reach out to us if you would like to know more, and enjoy the rest of your day.